Good morning, everybody. I'm Saagar Enjeti.
I'm Krystal Ball, and we got a lot in the show today. Senator Tom Daschle talking about cannabis, and we also have Senator Sanders' speechwriter, David Sirota, talking about his big speech today on socialism, so that's going to be interesting.
That's right. So all that coming up today on Rising.
Good morning, friends. Saagar, what are you looking at today?
I'm taking a look at the former vice president's speech last night in Iowa, where he addressed the current state of the 2020 campaign. But the problem is, it looks like 2016 all over again. The former vice president flip-flopped on China, just like he flip-flopped on the Hyde Amendment earlier last week. First, he said that China was not going to eat our lunch, that the idea that what President Trump has been talking about, and for much of the reason that so much of the Midwest voted for him, that the industrial base has all been outsourced, that so much of our economy has been penetrated by Chinese money, that is ridiculous. Now he's calling China a threat. But he also is not just calling China a threat. He's borrowing a bit from the 2016 playbook of the former Democratic nominee, Hillary Clinton. He borrowed from her language, calling him an existential threat last night. Let's take a listen to what he said.
I believe that the president is literally an existential threat to America. But this is a guy who does everything to separate and frighten people. It's about fear and loathing. It's about the way he calls people the names he calls them. No president has done something like that, for God's sake. I mean, it's bizarre, and it's damaging. And so I think he's genuinely a threat to our core values, and he's a threat to our standing in the world.
We've heard this story before, folks. 2016. This is not who we are. The president is damaging norms. The president is going against the consensus. That is exactly why 65 million people voted for him, because they are fed up with the establishment in Washington. It really does lead to the question, what does Joe Biden stand for? Right now, all he stands for is a return to 2012 politics, right after gay marriage passed, before the age of woke politics, before the questioning of the neoliberal consensus, before migration and the crises swept across Europe. It's the warm embrace of the smiling pair of President Barack Obama and of Joe Biden. And that day has passed, right, Krystal? We've talked about this so many times on this show, which is only a select part of the country wants any of that to come back. Unfortunately, for many Democrats, and maybe for America, a lot of those people vote because they're old.
I mean, I think you are 100% correct here, and it's something that people really fail to understand. The norms and the guardrails that were in place here, people saw them as being in place in order to keep the elites in power. I mean, the idea that, look, I think this president is lawless, right? I think he is incredibly destructive, and more so, I think the movement that he represents here and around the world is much more powerful than he is, and is incredibly damaging, destructive, etc. But the idea that it was this president who created lawlessness is absurd. Think back to the 2008 financial crisis, right? The financial titans of this country blew up our economy and almost crumbled the entire global economy and faced zero accountability. So if we want to talk lawlessness, it goes way back before this president. And I think Joe Biden has zero understanding of this. He talks about this president as an aberration. No, he's not. He has this fantasy that if he gets elected, Republicans are going to work with him. No, they're not. They didn't work with Obama and Biden before.
Trump is a product of the Joe Biden politics of yesterday.
That's right.
2003, the invasion of Iraq. All the people who beat the drum for that are sitting on cable news panels, or they're sitting in high-flying think tanks making a lot of money. 2008, all the lobbyists, Henry Paulson, Tim Geithner, all the people who messed up the financial crisis and then the handling of the financial crisis. Where are they all now?
Well, and even go back further. Financial deregulation,
yes, right. So much.
NAFTA, TPP,
exactly.
Handling the financial crisis, the Iraq War, like all of these things led to this moment. The Democratic Party, look, the Republicans have always been the party of the plutocrats, right? That's not a surprise. The Democratic Party was supposed to be the party of the working man, and Joe Biden was a central part of abandoning working class Americans across this country.
That's right. That's why there are rotting fields where there used to be some pretty great factories. But
Indeed.
what are you taking a look at, Krystal?
Well, I'm looking at Jon Stewart on the Hill yesterday. So let me give a little bit of context here. Outrageously, the heroes of 9/11, the men and women who ran into burning, crumbling buildings, the men and women who risked their lives and in many cases lost their health, our Congress has not been able to get their act together to see that the healthcare needs of those first responders is taken care of. So back in 2010, it took comedian Jon Stewart's aggressive on-air advocacy to get healthcare funding to begin with, and that was over the objections of Republican lawmakers who worried about creating a quote, entitlement program. Insane. Then, even then, that funding was only authorized for 5 years. So after 5 years, in 2015, Stewart had to come back on air and shame Congress once again into doing what's right and extending that funding. And now here we are, yet again, almost 5 years later, funding set to expire again, and Congress has failed to act. So here was Stewart yesterday on the Hill, flanked by first responders.
Your indifference costs these men and women their most valuable commodity, time. It's the one thing they're running out of. Certainly 9/11 first responders shouldn't have to decide whether to live or to have a place to live. And the idea that you can only give them 5 more years of the VCF because you're not quite sure what's going to happen 5 years from now, well, I can tell you, I'm pretty sure what's going to happen 5 years from now. More of these men and women are going to get sick and they are going to die. They did their jobs with courage, grace, tenacity, humility. 18 years later, do yours.
For shame. For shame that doing the most basic, obvious, decent thing for these heroes requires a national shaming from a celebrity. These men and women should not even have to ask for the care that they need, let alone require the assistance of Jon Stewart. And it raises the question, what else? What else is going undone? Basic needs unmet because our veterans or our first responders or the men and women who go to work and make our country go every single day don't always have a Jon Stewart, a wealthy, famous celebrity to actually make their voices count. This is a wake-up call, people, and it's a reminder that the rot in our system is deep and it predates this moment. This is a siren call that we absolutely must give Congress back to ordinary citizens. Making Congress work for the people is not a nice to do if we can kind of thing. It is a national emergency. This was absolutely unbelievable, Saagar.
Nothing
that
to
it
say.
takes a celebrity to get this done.
Every 9/11, I go back and I watch Jon Stewart's. He has the initial show right after the tragedy. And he talks about how the Statue of Liberty is the thing that you can see now from the view of downtown Manhattan. And he's been a champion of this cause ever since. It's disgusting to see what happened on Capitol Hill yesterday. And you're right, it's a great reminder of how many Jon Stewart, there's not a Jon Stewart for every cause.
Right.
There's not a Jon Stewart for every worker. Who are the Jon Stewarts for the people who lost their jobs to mass industrialization? Who are the Jon Stewart for people who literally go bankrupt because they can't pay for their health insurance?
And one of the points he made is every single politician has said we will never forget.
Right.
And what have they done? I mean, such hypocrisy here. And again, it just shows the way that the rot in the system, the accountability to ordinary Americans is absolutely gone.
It's disgusting. Nothing else to say.
Next up on Rising, Senator Bernie Sanders has frequently been called a socialist. He calls himself a democratic socialist, and today he is explaining what exactly that means.
Sanders' speechwriter outlines today's presidential campaign speech, and he gives us some perspective on the 2020 race so far when Rising returns.